Hello fellow space enthusiasts. Clifton Curtis Williams Jr., who was better known as C.C., he was killed when the T-38 NASA jet he was flying went into a sudden dive and crashed into the ground. This would be the 8th death of an American astronaut between 1964 and 1967. For a while, Williams was unique amongst the astronaut corps.
I'd like to ask Captain Williams, do you plan in the near future to change your status as NASA's first and only bachelor astronaut?
Not in the immediate future, no.
Before becoming an astronaut, he had been concerned when applying to NASA that his being a bachelor would go against him. But after being selected and announced as an astronaut on the 14th of October 1963, Captain Williams of the United States Marine Corps was able to joke about it and replied to the standard question of, "What does your wife think of you being an astronaut?" by saying, "None of my lady friends voiced any objection." The 6-foot-tall Marine pilot certainly had no problem with his lady friends. Brian O'Leary wrote in his book, The Making of an Ex-Astronaut. It has been rumoured that during an astronaut geology field trip in the floor of the Grand Canyon, he would get phone calls from Playboy Club bunnies. One female admirer noted that Williams was harder to land than a spacecraft on the moon. The excellent book, Fallen Astronauts, describes him as tall, handsome and muscularly stocky. It goes on to say that he was well liked in the corridors of Houston, adding that he found it easy to make friends with his fellow astronauts, and his round face often split in a wide, affable grin. On the 1st of July 1964, C.C.'s status as a bachelor ended when he married Beth, a one-time water skiing performer at the Cypress Garden theme park in Florida. She said of her husband following his death, "This is a man who left the world with his smile. He had the biggest infectious smile. He walked in a room and would spread joy." Together they had a daughter called Catherine Ann, who was born on the 6th of January 1967. After being lined up to be the backup pilot on both Gemini 11 and Gemini 12, he was officially announced on the 21st of March 1966 as the Gemini 10 backup pilot alongside Alan Bean, following the crew shuffling that resulted after the deaths of Elliot C. and Charles Bassett. After Gemini 10, Deke Slayton, their boss, had very differing plans for this backup crew. He sent Bean to the wilderness of the Apollo Applications Program, while Williams was moved over to the stellar position of lunar module pilot in the moon landing program. His next assignment was officially announced on the 22nd of December 1966, when he was named as the backup lunar module pilot for Frank Borman's SA-503 mission, at that point designated as a high-altitude test of the Command Service Module and lunar module. There are a lot of ifs involved, but if this crew had remained in the backup role to Borman's crew, and if the initial planning to have the lunar module pilot exit first had remained in place, then Williams could have made a claim to being the first man on the moon. When asked which mission he would like to fly on the most, Williams replied, "I'd say the first lunar flight you make from the standpoint of personal satisfaction and accomplishment." If he had have made it to the moon, he said that his first words out on the surface would have been War Eagle, the battle cry of Auburn University, where he received a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering in 1954. The origins of this battle cry comes from an 1892 game of football against the University of Georgia. During this game, an eagle flew over the field of play, and the Auburn supporters started shouting War Eagle to rouse their team. Legend has it that at the end of the game, the eagle went into a dive, struck the ground and died. For Williams, the beginning of October 1967 was a typically busy time for an Apollo astronaut. He had a number of appointments lined up, which meant that he would be away from home. He would be flying the astronaut's jet, the T-38, because the appointments were spread over the East Coast. The T-38 could be an unforgiving aircraft at times, with a reputation for killing pilots if they took it for granted at slow speeds. It had already been involved in the deaths of 3 astronauts, and had been involved in an accident the day Gemini 10 had launched. On that occasion, astronauts Edward White and Russell Schweikart had aborted their takeoff due to engine failure, leading to the undercarriage collapsing. The jet Williams would be using for the next couple of days was relatively new, with Harold E. Bud Ream, the pilot who instructed the astronauts how to fly the lunar landing training vehicle, noting that it was a brand new T-38. "I don't think it even had 50 hours on it." On the 3rd of October, he flew with his boss Deke Slayton in the back seat from Ellington Air Force Base in Houston to Patrick Air Force Base, just south of the Space Center in Florida. The next day he flew to the Grumman factory, who were the prime contractor for the lunar module in New York, where he stayed for a couple of hours before flying back to the Cape for a meeting. When this meeting was cancelled, he decided to head home. The following day he filed a flight plan back to Houston, and because this route allowed for it, he planned to make a stopover at Brookley Air Force Base at Mobile in Alabama so that he could visit his parents. He wanted to visit with them because his father, Clifton C. Williams Sr., was ill. When his father later found out that his son had been on the way to visit him, he said, "I had no idea." After his stop at Mobile, he would have continued on to Ellington Air Force Base in Houston. The flight back was probably one of mixed emotions for Williams. Just before leaving for the Cape, his wife Beth had told him that they were expecting their second child. In Fallen Astronauts, she states, "My last memory is the smile on his face as he backed his pickup truck out of the garage." He would also no doubt have thought about his father, who had been diagnosed with cancer. As the wheels left the tarmac, the only issue he had was with a faulty transponder, the avionics system that provides air traffic control information about the aircraft's altitude and identification. The faulty transponder meant that he had to stay below 24,000 feet due to air traffic rules. This reduction in ceiling altitude would contribute to the fact that just 33 minutes later he would be dead. Williams reached 22,500 feet, and 11 minutes after taking off, he reported his altitude and location over Orlando by radio. The weather that day was fine, as a Leon County Sheriff's Office spokesman would later confirm when he commented that weather conditions couldn't have contributed to the accident because they were ideal for flying. Everything was looking like just another routine flight, when suddenly, at 1:24 p.m, as Williams was flying near Tallahassee, the T-38 suddenly went into a dive. To determine what caused the aircraft to behave the way it did, the crash investigation team searched for an answer to this tragedy amongst the pieces of the aircraft that they recovered and from flight tests. In the final analysis, with no explanation from the pilot during the Mayday call for the loss of control, and with much of the aircraft being in such a disintegrated condition, the most likely scenario for what happened is a mixture of conjecture and fact. The investigation determined that both the left and the right ailerons, the hinged flight control surfaces on an aircraft's wings used to provide a movement around the aircraft's longitudinal axis, had been found in opposite positions. The left aileron was up and the right aileron was down. A failure with one of the ailerons could have been corrected with the other, so it was determined that the most likely cause of the crash was the control stick being jammed. If the pilot had been cruising along in level flight at 22,500 feet, then Williams must have performed some kind of manoeuvre to allow this jamming to take place. Woodream speculated that the jamming of the control system could have occurred as C.C. approached Tallahassee, because at this point he was supposed to make a turn to the west. Ream conjectured that, "I personally think it was simply C.C. rolling his plane slightly to check his position. Yeah, there's Tallahassee," as he got ready to make his turn. From tests using the settings of the crashed aircraft, the investigation team concluded that whatever was occurring immediately before the control system was jammed at 22,500 feet, it forced the aircraft to pitch to the left and enter a rolling dive. Soon the aircraft would have been in a near vertical dive, but the effects of being around a Mach 1 caused the rolling to reduce and then stop. During the later tests, this reduction in the roll rate occurred between 13,000 feet and 11,000 feet. The investigation team concluded that the dive from 22,500 feet to the altitudes at which the rolling stopped had taken 26 seconds and 28 seconds respectively. During this time, they further concluded that Williams had already decided that control of the aircraft could not be recovered and that he had decided to eject. When the rolling stopped, the investigation team surmised that Williams elected to delay the ejection in order to send a mayday call. This decision cost him his life. If he had ejected at this point without making the call, the investigation team theorised that Williams could have survived. Switching the channel on the UHF radio over to the emergency channel took around 4 to 4.5 seconds, which would mean he started his transmission below 9,000 feet. Williams sent the following call over his radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is NASA 922, ejecting just off Orlando, I mean Tallahassee." With a transmission duration of 2 seconds, it meant it ended below 7,000 feet. Paul Hannay, who worked as an information officer at NASA, would later save the recording of the pilot's report. It was businesslike. Even if he had momentarily thought that the jet was coming under some sort of control because the roll had stopped, it was still losing height rapidly and heading towards the ground at an alarming speed, so it is a mystery why he not only made the Mayday call, but that he also took the time to correct his location and sound so calm. It was later determined that Williams ejected between 1,500 feet and 1,300 feet, which corresponds to 1.5 and 1.3 seconds prior to impact. At this height, and at the speed he was travelling, survival was not possible. Just moments later at 1:25 p.m, the jet struck the ground at around 700 miles per hour. The impact left a crater 29 feet wide and 12 feet deep. Part of the crater can be seen in this newspaper photo, showing local Chuck Groves standing in front of it. US Air Force investigator Major Joe Johnson stated that the aircraft's impact with the ground was a near vertical collision with explosion on impact. B.R. Thompson, a local construction firm owner who had been on the plantation cutting wood at the time, along with his neighbour W.A. All, said of the crash, "It wasn't what you would call a terrific explosion. It was more like dynamite going off." It was estimated, by looking at the wingtips on the crater rim, that the aircraft struck the ground in an inverted dive of between 75 to 80 degrees. Debris was strewn across the area up to 400 feet away, while parts of the canopy were found up to 700 feet away. The ejector seat was found just 47 feet away from the impact site. B.R. Thompson and W.A. All were the first on the scene, and Thompson said of the aircraft's impact, "It didn't even hit a tree right on top of a tall pine and clay hill." The two had done their best to extinguish a small grass fire before going for help. Thompson said that the aircraft had almost completely disintegrated. There wasn't even a part big enough to take any effort to pick up. A highway patrolman later on the scene stated there was not enough of the plane left to even tell whether it was a jet or what. An investigation team was set up in the wake of the accident that included Alan Shepard, Joe Engel and Bud Ream. In this newspaper photo, Shepard and Engel can be seen looking into the crater left by the T-38. Excavating equipment was brought in to dig out the debris so that it could be inspected. The two engines were recovered from depths of 17 feet and 18 feet. The NASA report stated that both engines had been compressed from 104 inches to 46 inches. The recovered aircraft parts were transported to a hangar at Moody Air Force Base for inspection. The NASA safety report concluded that the primary cause of this accident was a jam of the lateral control system in an undetermined fashion. It went on. The most probable origin of the control problem was determined to be foreign object jamming of the aileron system. Although there was never a conclusive reason found for the cause of the aileron jamming, it was found that in the area below the rear cockpit it is possible to jam the controls in two places using common aircraft tools, such as a screwdriver or socket. This jamming had caused rolling velocities and a near ballistic trajectory from level cruise altitude to a high angle ground impact. The report continued that the control problem had led to the pilot taking action that meant he initiated ejection too late to avoid fatality. The astronaut office was quick to start making any signs of the deceased astronaut disappear. Brian O'Leary noted that within 2 hours, in solemn ritual, the secretaries removed all signs of C.C. Williams, the name tag on his office door, his mailbox, and the files full of his portraits which were sent out to autograph seekers. Further crew shuffles in the lead up to the crash meant that Williams was unofficially on the backup crew to James McDivitt's D-Type mission, but the lack of any unofficial assignment for him since the end of 1966 resulted in some confusion in the press as to what role he had at the time of his death. Fate would see to it that the roles of Bean and Williams were swapped. Just over a month after his death, on the 20th of November 1967, the official announcement for Conrad's crew was made, with Bean having replaced Williams. It would be Bean who entered the history books as one of the Apollo moonwalkers, while Williams entered the obscurity amongst the general public of the astronauts who never got to fly. Despite this, he would always have a postscript associated with the Apollo 12 mission. On the mission patch, the crew included a 4th star in remembrance of Williams. On the 9th of October, as a sudden heavy fall of rain over Miccosukee flooded the impact crater and stopped the excavation of the crashed T-38, in Arlington National Cemetery, the funeral of C.C. Williams was taking place. Nearly 8 months later, his second daughter, Jane D. Williams, was born on the 31st of May 1968, just a couple of days after his father had died on the 27th of May. His other daughter Catherine said of her father, "He was such a good role model and lived by a simple philosophy. Work hard, be dedicated to your goals, and have a good sense of humour." Although he never made it into space, United States Marine Corps Major Clifton Curtis Williams Jr. has a lasting memorial on NASA's Space Mirror at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I hope you found this video interesting. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.